Daddy, please don't leave me. Not today. Not like this. Those were the last words Aaliyah Brooks pressed into her father's chest as the monitors above his bed slowed, stuttered, and finally gave up. The hospital room was cold enough to make her bones ache. Everything smelled like disinfectant and metal, like grief had been scrubbed into the walls. And yet, even after the flatline, even after the nurses moved with soft hands and softer voices, Aaliyah still couldn't believe what her eyes were seeing. Because less than 24 hours later, less than 24 hours after she buried the only person who had ever loved her without conditions, Aaliyah stood in a courthouse parking garage in Chicago, 6 months pregnant, still wearing funeral black, watching her husband sign a marriage license. Not for her. For Simone Price, the woman in the crimson coat who had leaned against the doorway of the ICU yesterday and whispered. Finally, the moment Earl Brooks' heart monitor went silent. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the envelope in her hand. The paper trembled with her pulse. It was thick, old-fashioned, the kind people used when they wanted something to outlast them. No return address. Just her name, written in her father's careful handwriting, as if he'd been steady when he wrote it. Her nails were still stained with cemetery dirt from that morning. She'd pressed roses into the fresh mound like she could pin her father to the earth by sheer love. She'd gone home with mud under her cuticles and an ache so deep it felt like a bruise inside her ribs. Then Kendrick had texted her one line. "I'm at the courthouse. We need to handle paperwork today." He hadn't said what paperwork. He didn't have to. By the time Aaliyah drove downtown, her hands on the steering wheel were steady only because shock had a way of freezing the body into something that could still move. Now she stood behind a concrete pillar, half-shadowed, the air damp and echoing with distant footsteps. The courthouse above them hummed with late-morning business, clerks calling names, doors opening and closing, the ordinary machinery of other people's lives. Down here, the light was sickly and flat, and the sound carried too far. Kendrick and Simone were framed by the glass doors near the elevator bank. Kendrick's shoulders were squared the way he squared them for meetings, for moments when he wanted to look certain. He wore a charcoal suit he never bothered with at home, the one that made him look like a man who knew exactly where he was going. Simone stood beside him, close enough that her perfume reached the hallway and crept into the garage like a warning. Her hair was perfectly smooth, her lipstick the kind of red that didn't apologize. She held Kendrick's elbow with 2 fingers, like a claim. A clerk slid papers across the counter. Kendrick signed without hesitation. Simone's left hand flashed as she reached for the counter. Fresh manicure, pale pink, wedding ready. A thin diamond band sat on her finger, not yet official, but already displayed. Kendrick noticed it and smiled the way he used to smile at Aaliyah when he thought he'd surprised her. That smile didn't belong to either woman. It belonged to Kendrick's hunger. The clerk congratulated them, voice bright, and Simone lifted her chin, drinking it in. Aaliyah felt those words hit her like sleet, sharp, quiet, and impossible to wipe away from skin. She breathed slow, counting heartbeats the way her father taught. Aaliyah felt something inside her make a quiet, sickening click. Yesterday, she had been a daughter losing her father. Today, she was a wife watching her husband become someone else's husband, while her father's grave was still settling. Her belly tightened, the baby rolling as if she, too, sensed the danger. Aaliyah pressed her free hand over the curve of her stomach, anchoring herself. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay." Behind the counter, Simone laughed lightly at something Kendrick said. It wasn't a laugh that came from joy. It was a laugh that came from winning. Simone leaned in close to Kendrick's ear, then glanced over her shoulder. For a split second, her eyes scanned the garage as if she expected an audience. Aaliyah's breath caught, but Simone's gaze slid past her hiding place and moved on. Simone turned back to Kendrick, smiled wide, and mouthed a word Aaliyah could read even from here. Finally. Aaliyah's throat closed. She could hear her own heartbeat, too loud, too insistent. She could taste grief. She could feel the envelope cutting into her palm. The day before, in that hospital room, her father had squeezed that same hand with surprising strength. "Baby girl," he had whispered, voice thin as paper, "when I'm gone, Open this and remember, you are never alone, you are never poor, you are never powerless. I made sure of that. Aaliyah had tried to laugh then, a broken little sound. Daddy, please, she'd begged. Stop talking like that. But Earl Brooks had stared at her the way he always had when he needed her to listen. Not dramatic, just certain. Promise me, he'd said. Promise you'll wait until you're alone. Promise you won't tell Kendrick. Not yet. She had promised because she would have promised him anything. She would have promised him the moon if it meant he would stay. And then he'd left anyway. Now Kendrick's pen lifted from the paper. The clerk stamped something. Simone's smile widened, and she reached up to touch Kendrick's jaw in a gesture that looked intimate and practiced. Aaliyah's stomach turned. The world blurred for one moment, then snapped into brutal focus. She could walk out. She could step into the light, call Kendrick's name, force him to explain. She could make a scene right here and let the sound of her grief bounce off cement until the whole building heard it. But something colder than rage settled over her. The last time she'd begged to be heard, she'd been 12, crying on the steps of their apartment after someone said her father was just maintenance. Earl had sat beside her, quiet, letting her cry until she ran out of breath. Then he'd said, "You don't have to shout to be strong, Leah. Strong people don't beg to be seen. They build something so solid nobody can ignore it." Leah, his nickname for her, soft and familiar, a name that belonged to the version of her that still believed love could protect her from anything. Aaliyah swallowed. Kendrick turned, and for a second she thought he might sense her there, might look straight through the pillar and meet her eyes. But he didn't. He looked past the garage, past the echo, past the woman he had married and left in place like an old coat. He leaned down and kissed Simone. Not a peck, not polite. A kiss that lingered, the kiss that should have landed on his grieving wife last night. Aaliyah's knees weakened, but she held herself upright. She had learned how to hold her body together when it wanted to fold. Simone pulled back, satisfied, and Kendrick laughed. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, thumbs moving fast. Aaliyah knew that posture. He was texting. Her own phone buzzed in her purse like a small, cruel echo. She didn't need to look. She already knew what it would say. "Busy today. We'll talk later." Busy. Like grief was an appointment you could reschedule. Aaliyah pressed her back to the concrete, cold seeping through the fabric of her dress. She stared at the envelope again, at her name, at the familiar slant of her father's handwriting. Her father had smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee, like effort. He had never been the kind of man strangers noticed in a room. But he had noticed her, every day, every version of her. And he had left her this envelope like a match struck in the dark. Aaliyah checked the time on the dashboard clock of the car parked 2 spaces away. The red digits glowed like an accusation. 10:13 a.m. Her father had placed the envelope in her hand at 7:26 that morning, right after the funeral, right before Kendrick disappeared with his client meeting excuse. 2 hours and 47 minutes. Aaliyah's mind snagged on the number the way a sleeve catches on a nail. 2 hours and 47 minutes until something in this story changed. She didn't know how she knew. She just felt it in the clear, strange space inside her, where shock had hollowed everything else out. Aaliyah looked back at Kendrick and Simone. They started walking toward the elevator, Simone's heels clicking like punctuation. Simone adjusted her coat collar, proud. Kendrick held the papers like they were a trophy. Aaliyah watched them go, and the grief inside her did something unexpected. It didn't explode. It sharpened. Because in that hospital room, right before the end, Earl Brooks had said one more thing, so softly the machines almost swallowed it. "He's going to leave you, baby girl." Aaliyah had shaken her head, furious at the idea, furious at her father for spending his last breaths on fear instead of comfort. "Don't," she'd whispered. "Please don't." But Earl had smiled, small and sad. "I can see it," he'd said. "In his eyes. He looks at you like you're a burden now that you're pregnant, now that I'm dying, and I need you to hear me. When he walks away, he can't touch what I'm leaving you. Not one penny, not one piece. I made it bulletproof." Bulletproof. Aaliyah's hand curled tighter around the envelope until the edge pressed into her skin. She pictured her father, weak and furious, calling someone with the last strength he had, setting traps she didn't yet understand. Kendrick and Simone disappeared into the elevator. The glass doors slid shut. The garage fell quiet again except for a distant car alarm and the soft drip of water from a pipe overhead. Aaliyah finally stepped out from behind the pillar. Her legs moved like they belonged to someone else. She walked to her car, opened the door, and sat. For a long moment, she didn't start the engine. She just stared at her hands on the steering wheel. One hand still held the envelope. The other rested over her belly. Her baby kicked once, firm, like a reminder. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. "You saw it, Daddy," she whispered. "You knew." The envelope sat in her lap like a weight and a promise, and right then, as the cold air seeped in through the cracked window and the courthouse hummed above her, Aaliyah understood something that would carry her through the next few days. The people who leave you don't always take your life with them. Sometimes they clear the space for the life you were always meant to have. So don't go anywhere. In a moment, I'm going to take you back to the hospital room where Earl Brooks whispered his final instructions, and to the one small key he hid in plain sight. If you're still here with me, tap the like button so this story can reach the people who need it, and comment below. What time are you watching, and what city or state are you listening from? Before that courthouse garage, before the echo of Simone's heels and Kendrick's easy smile, there was a version of Aaliyah Brooks who still believed the world ran on fairness. Not perfect fairness. She wasn't naive. She lived in Chicago long enough to know winter didn't care how good you were and bills didn't pause for heartbreak. But she believed in something simple. If you loved people right, if you showed up, if you worked hard and kept your hands clean, life might not reward you, but it wouldn't punish you for being decent. That belief came from her father. Earl Brooks was the kind of man most people looked through instead of at. A maintenance man at DuSable Elementary on the south side, he carried a ring of keys that jingled like small coins, and he wore the same navy work jacket through every season. In summer it smelled like sunscreen and cafeteria steam. In winter it smelled like salt from the sidewalks and lemon cleaner from the hallways. Earl fixed broken lockers, changed light bulbs, mopped messes other people stepped around, and still found time to talk softly to the kids who had no one else. He did all that, then came home and did it again for Aaliyah. He made grilled cheese when the fridge was almost empty. He taped her science projects together at midnight. He sat in the front row of every school play, clapping so hard his palms turned red. When she was little, he used to kiss her forehead and say, "Leah, you are loved beyond measure." When she was older, when she started rolling her eyes at the softness, he didn't stop. He just said it quieter, like a fact. Aaliyah's mother had died when Aaliyah was born. She grew up with that absence like a missing tooth you couldn't stop touching with your tongue. Earl never filled the space with bitterness. He filled it with steadiness. He never dated much, never brought strangers into their small apartment in Hyde Park. He worked, he saved, and he loved his daughter with the devotion of a man who knew life could snatch things away without warning. Aaliyah learned early to be self-contained. She did well in school, got a solid job in project coordination for a mid-sized logistics firm in the Loop, and built a life that didn't require anyone to rescue her. She had her own checking account, her own car, her own quiet pride. Then she met Kendrick Brooks. They weren't related, just the same last name, which felt like a joke the first time he introduced himself. Kendrick had a way of making the air around him brighter. Tall, polished, always dressed like he might get pulled into a photo shoot at any moment. He sold medical software for a growing company downtown. He talked in confident arcs, future promotions, bigger apartments, better vacations. He didn't just want more, he wanted more now. And when he looked at Aaliyah, he looked like he saw something rare. For the first year, Kendrick made her feel chosen. He brought flowers to her office, not cheap grocery store bundles, but thick bouquets wrapped in paper that crinkled like money. He texted good morning every day. He learned her coffee order. He listened when she talked about her father. He even drove with her to do Sabal one afternoon and shook Earl's hand, calling him Sir, with enough respect that Aaliyah's chest warmed. Earl didn't say much afterward. He just watched Kendrick from his chair, quiet as always, eyes taking measurements. "What?" Aaliyah had asked, half amused, half defensive. Earl shrugged. "Just looking." At the time, Aaliyah thought it meant approval. When Kendrick proposed, it was in late spring by the lakefront, the skyline behind them and the water glittering like a promise. He got down on one knee, his voice steady, and said, "Leah, I want to build with you." Build. That word hit her in the ribs. She said yes, and Earl hugged them both. His arms were strong, his work hands rough against Kendrick's suit jacket. The wedding was small, mostly Earl's friends from the school and Aaliyah's co-workers. Kendrick's side was bigger, louder, and dressed in brighter colors. His mother cried like she'd won a prize. Kendrick smiled like a man walking into his own future. For a while, it felt like the future might be kind. They moved into a tidy apartment in South Loop, with a view that wasn't fancy, but still made Kendrick feel like they were ascending. Aaliyah paid attention to budgets. Kendrick paid attention to appearances. She didn't mind. She told herself balance was normal in a marriage. Somebody steadied the ship while somebody else dreamed. Then, slowly, the dreams became demands. Kendrick started talking about the right circles, about networking dinners that ran late and weekend conferences that seemed to pop up every month. When Aaliyah asked questions, he called it support. "I'm doing this for us," he'd say, "for our next level." If she hesitated, he'd sigh like she didn't understand the basics of ambition. Still, he wasn't cruel, not yet. He just moved faster than she did, and Aaliyah kept trying to match his pace. The pregnancy was not planned, but it wasn't unwanted. When the test turned positive, Aaliyah sat on the bathroom floor shaking, joy and fear mixing in her throat. Kendrick stared at the little plastic stick like it was a complicated contract, then forced a smile. "Wow," he said. Okay, we can do this." But the "we" sounded thin. Over the next weeks, Kendrick talked a lot about timing, about expenses, about how a baby would shift priorities. He said it like the shift was mostly hers to manage. Aaliyah didn't panic. She told herself men adjusted slower. She told herself Kendrick would come around once he felt the baby kick, once the pregnancy stopped being an idea and became a person. Then Earl got sick. At first it was just tiredness. Earl complained about indigestion, a nagging pain he tried to ignore. He joked that he was getting old and needed to stop eating hot dogs from the corner stand. Aaliyah nagged him to see a doctor. Earl promised he would. He kept working. 2 months later, he collapsed in a school hallway. The diagnosis landed like a blunt object. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor said the words gently, but there was no gentle meaning inside them. Aaliyah heard months and felt her body go cold. Earl nodded like he already knew, like he'd been carrying the truth quietly for a while. From that day, time changed shape. Aaliyah started spending her evenings at the hospital after work, sitting in hard plastic chairs that bruised the back of her thighs. She learned the language of beeps and numbers. She learned how to swallow tears in public and cry in bathroom stalls. She learned the smell of chemo, sharp, chemical, wrong. Kendrick came at first. He brought Earl a basket of fruit and made supportive noises. He kissed Aaliyah's cheek and said, "We'll get through this." But he never stayed long. He always had somewhere else to be. A call, a meeting, a presentation, a dinner that couldn't be missed. And then there was Simone Price. Aaliyah heard Simone's name before she ever saw her face. Kendrick mentioned her casually, too casually. "Simone wants us to tighten the pitch deck. Simone's pushing hard for Q4 numbers. Simone's been killing it. Corporate loves her." One evening, while Aaliyah sat beside Earl's bed, Kendrick stepped into the hallway to take a call. His voice drifted back through the cracked door. Low, warm. Familiar in a way it hadn't been with Aaliyah lately. Aaliyah didn't move. She stared at her father's hands, thin now, veins raised like blue rivers. She listened to Kendrick laugh softly at something on the other end of the phone. When Kendrick came back in, he looked almost annoyed to find her still there. "Everything okay?" he asked, but his eyes slid past her to his screen. Earl noticed. Earl always noticed. Later, after Kendrick left, Earl turned his head toward Aaliyah and said, "That man is already halfway gone." Aaliyah's throat tightened. "Daddy, don't start. He's stressed." Earl stared at the ceiling, breathing shallow. Stress doesn't make a man forget how to love. Aaliyah tried to push the words away. She needed Kendrick to be stable. She needed her life not to break in two places at once. She told herself Earl was sick and afraid and seeing shadows. She told herself not to borrow trouble. But trouble didn't need to be borrowed. It was moving in anyway, slow and quiet, like a draft you only notice when the room is already cold. Aaliyah was at the vending machines, fighting nausea, when a woman glided through the ICU doors like she owned the air. Simone's coat was flawless, her smile rehearsed. She carried a coffee with Kendrick's name written in thick black marker. When she handed it to him, Kendrick's face softened in a way Aaliyah hadn't seen in weeks. Simone's eyes flicked to Aaliyah, then away. No apology. By the time Aaliyah reached 6 months pregnant, Earl was in the ICU. The machines were louder there, more insistent, as if the air itself was impatient. Aaliyah sat beside him, holding his hand, watching the monitors argue with his body. That was the night Kendrick texted from Dave's, the night Earl's breathing changed, the night he asked Aaliyah for a promise with his last clear strength. And that was the night Aaliyah finally understood. The life she thought she was living had been a thin layer of paint. Underneath it, something rotten had been waiting for the right moment to show through. She didn't know yet how far Kendrick would go. She didn't know what Simone was willing to do. She didn't know what was inside the envelope. But she knew this. Her father had seen the ending before she ever knew the story had started. And when Earl Brooks told his daughter, "Trust the plan," it wasn't hope, it was a warning. The ICU lights never fully dimmed. Even at 2 in the morning, the ceiling panels glowed with a pale, washed-out brightness that made every shadow look guilty. Aaliyah sat in the same vinyl chair she'd been sitting in for hours, her spine aching, her ankles swollen under the hem of her black maternity leggings. The hospital air felt too dry to breathe, but it carried the same sharp scent, bleach, plastic, and that faint metallic undertone that clung to places where endings happened. Earl Brooks lay in the bed like a man already halfway gone. His skin had a dull gray cast beneath the thin sheet, and the rise and fall of his chest looked borrowed, as if his lungs were renting their last few breaths. The monitor above him ticked out his heartbeat in green lines that spiked and dipped like a lie detector. The ventilator hissed softly, steady as a metronome, keeping time for a body that couldn't keep time on its own. Aaliyah held his hand, careful of the IV taped to his wrist. Earl's fingers were still broad, still rough from a lifetime of fixing what other people broke, but now they felt lighter. Too light. Like the weight of him was slipping away a little more each time she blinked. On the narrow counter by the window sat a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Cold now, bitter. It smelled like defeat. Her phone rested face down on her lap, but she could feel the vibration before it even came, the way you feel thunder in your bones before you hear it. Buzz. She turned it over and saw Kendrick's name. Still at the hospital? My presentation got moved to tomorrow morning. Going to stay at Dave's tonight to prep. Don't wait up. Aaliyah stared at the message until the words lost their meaning. Then they snapped back into focus like a slap. Her father was dying in front of her, and Kendrick was worried about a presentation. She didn't reply. She set the phone down beside the coffee and leaned closer to Earl, her forehead almost touching his hand. "I'm here, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm right here." Earl's eyelids fluttered. For a second, she thought he wouldn't open them again. Then his lashes lifted, and those eyes, still sharp, still her father's, found her. He blinked once, slow. "Leah," he rasped. The sound of her nickname pulled something out of her chest. She swallowed hard. "Yes, Daddy." His mouth moved like the words were heavy stones he had to push uphill. Need. Tell you. Something. No. The word came out too fast, too desperate. Save your strength. Don't talk. Just rest. Earl squeezed her fingers with a strength that startled her. His gaze tightened. Not angry, just urgent. This is it, he whispered. No more pretending. Aaliyah felt her throat burn. Please don't. Earl coughed, the sound wet and tearing. A nurse appeared in the doorway, checked a bag on the IV stand, then slipped away again, leaving the room to its quiet beeping. Earl drew a thin breath. In my apartment, he said, voice shaking. Bedroom closet, top shelf, old, shoebox, Nike. Aaliyah shook her head as if she could shake the words out of the air. Daddy, what are you talking about? False bottom, Earl breathed. Key. Her fingers went numb around his. Key? Safety deposit, he said, and the words came out like a confession. First Lake Shore Bank, box 1247. Aaliyah blinked. A safety deposit box? Why? Earl's eyes sharpened. Promise me. I promise, she said automatically. Of course I promise. No, Earl whispered, and his grip tightened again. Promise. You'll go alone, and you won't. He swallowed, breath whistling. You won't tell Kendrick, not yet. Aaliyah's lungs locked. Why wouldn't I tell Kendrick? He's my husband. Earl's eyes held hers, and inside them she saw something she didn't recognize at first. Fear, yes, but not fear of death. Fear of what death would leave behind. Because, Earl whispered, I see him. Aaliyah frowned, confused. See him? I see how he looks at you now, Earl said, each word tearing. Like your weight, like your belly is an expense, like I'm a bill. No, Aaliyah's voice trembled. That's not... He's stressed. He loves me. Earl's gaze didn't move. He loves what you can hold him up with. Aaliyah felt tears spill over. Daddy, Earl breathed in, shallow. 3 weeks ago, I changed my will. The words made her dizzy. You have a will? Earl's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Protection, he whispered. For you, for my grandbaby. Aaliyah's free hand flew to her belly as if the baby might fall through the floor if she didn't hold on. You're scaring me. Earl's face tightened with effort. Listen, you're not powerless. Not now. Not ever. The monitor beeped faster, then slowed again. Earl's breathing hitched. Aaliyah leaned in closer. Daddy, please. Just stay with me. Earl's lips trembled. You know, best day of my life? Aaliyah shook her head, sobbing silently. The day your mama put you in my arms, he whispered. You were so tiny. So angry, like you came in ready to fight. Aaliyah let out a broken laugh, and it cracked into a sob. Earl's gaze softened. I looked at you, and I thought, this is it. This is what I'm for. Aaliyah pressed her cheek to his hand, shaking. I'm not ready. Earl swallowed, eyes distant now. My family wanted me to be a different man. Aaliyah's head lifted slightly. Your family? Earl's eyes found hers again, and his voice dropped lower, like he didn't trust the room. I had a choice once. What choice? Your mama, he whispered, or my inheritance. Aaliyah froze. Inheritance? Earl's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I chose her, every time. Aaliyah's breath came out in a thin gasp. Daddy, what are you saying? Earl's eyes glistened. My real name, he whispered, is Earl Hartwell, the third. Aaliyah stared, certain she misheard. Hartwell? Earl nodded once. The monitor blinked. The ventilator hissed. Hartwell Industrial, he whispered, and it sounded like a myth. My grandfather's empire. Aaliyah's mind spun. She tried to picture her father in a world of boardrooms and private planes, and her brain rejected it like poison. That's not... she started. I left, Earl said. changed my name, took a job fixing toilets and mopping floors, and I never regretted it. Not once. Aaliyah shook her head in disbelief, tears falling faster. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to be you, Earl whispered, not a number. The monitor's rhythm changed again. Longer gaps between beeps. The room's air felt thinner. Earl coughed, a harsh rattle. The envelope, he gasped, in the box, explains everything. Trusts, protections. Aaliyah's whole body trembled. Daddy, please, I can't. Earl's eyes held hers with fierce tenderness. Baby girl, when I'm gone, open it. And remember, you are never alone. You are never poor. You are never powerless. I made sure of that. The words landed like a hand on her back and a knife in her ribs. Aaliyah shook her head hard. No, 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 no. The monitor blared suddenly, a shrill alarm. A nurse rushed in, checked the screen, and her face tightened. Another nurse followed. They moved quickly, practiced. Earl turned his head slightly toward Aaliyah, his gaze softening, almost relieved. No machines, he whispered. Just my daughter. Aaliyah's mouth opened, but no sound came. The nurses hesitated, then nodded, their professionalism turning gentle. One of them touched Aaliyah's shoulder and backed away, giving her space like they were stepping out of a sacred place. Earl's eyes began to close. Daddy, Aaliyah whispered, voice breaking. Please don't leave me. His eyelids lifted one last time. Leah, he whispered, and his lips barely moved. Trust. The plan. Then his eyes closed. The monitor's green line stuttered, then flattened. Aaliyah didn't hear herself scream. She only felt the sound tear out of her throat as she collapsed onto his chest, shaking so violently she couldn't breathe. She clutched his shirt, breathing him in. Coffee, soap, the faint scent of lemon cleaner that clung to him no matter how many times he washed. She pressed her face into his shoulder like she could hide from the truth inside the fabric. And while she was still sobbing, while the nurses moved quietly, while the world narrowed down to that flat green line, her phone buzzed again on the counter. Aaliyah didn't look. She did look, though, when a soft, deliberate heel clicked outside the door. At first she thought it was another nurse. Then she saw the woman framed in the doorway, Simone Price, coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, hair glossy, eyes dry. She didn't step fully inside, as if the room's grief might stain her. Kendrick said you were here, Simone murmured, voice low enough that the nurses wouldn't hear. Her gaze slid to Earl's still face, then back to Aaliyah's. The faintest curl touched her lips, not sympathy, not even curiosity, more like relief. Aaliyah's fingers dug into her father's shirt. Get out! Simone blinked slowly, as if surprised by the command. I'm just paying respects. You don't know what that word means, Aaliyah said, her voice raw. Simone's eyes flicked to the flat green line, then to the side table where Aaliyah's phone sat. It's strange, she said softly, almost conversational. How fast life rearranges itself when someone important is no longer in the way. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. What did you say? Simone's smile sharpened, and for a moment her mask slipped, revealing something hungry underneath. She leaned a little closer, careful not to cross the threshold. Finally, she whispered, so quiet it barely registered as sound. Then she straightened, as if she'd said nothing at all, and walked away. Her heels clicked down the hall, each step measured, confident, like the ending had already been decided. Aaliyah lay on her father's chest, shaking, and realized the room wasn't the only thing that had gone silent. Something inside her had too, not her love, not her grief, something else, her willingness to pretend. When Kendrick finally arrived, the nurses were already adjusting sheets, already preparing the body the way they prepared everything in hospitals, efficiently, kindly, like sorrow was a shift they had learned to manage. Kendrick's eyes went to Earl's face, then away. He swallowed once, hard. Damn, he said under his breath, like a man who'd just seen a car accident on the highway. Aaliyah stood in front of the bed, blocking her father from Kendrick's gaze like she could still protect him. You're late, she said. Kendrick exhaled. Traffic. And Dave needed— Stop, Aaliyah cut in. Her voice sounded unfamiliar, too steady. Just stop talking. Kendrick's jaw tightened. He looked past her at the IV stand, the monitor, the empty space where a future should have been. What happens now? He asked, and the question wasn't about love, it was about logistics. Aaliyah stared at him. I haven't even— She swallowed. I haven't even said goodbye. Kendrick stepped closer, placed a hand on her shoulder for half a second, then removed it. Look, I'm sorry, he said, rehearsed. I know it's hard, but we've got to be practical. Funeral costs, time off work. Aaliyah's eyes burned. My father is still warm. Kendrick held up his hand slightly, defensive. I'm just saying we need a plan. Trust the plan, her father had said. Not Kendrick's plan, Earl's. Aaliyah turned away from Kendrick and looked at her father's face one more time. Earl's expression had settled into something peaceful, as if even death couldn't shake his certainty. Aaliyah leaned down and kissed his forehead. I'll do it, she whispered. I'll do it the way you said. Behind her, Kendrick's phone buzzed. He looked down immediately. Aaliyah didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. The next hours blurred, forms, signatures. A chaplain whose voice floated over her head like smoke. Aaliyah called Kendrick, left a message that sounded like someone else's voice. My dad is gone. She sat in a waiting room with a vending machine humming in the corner and stared at the floor until the pattern of the tiles burned into her eyes. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was the color of wet concrete. Aaliyah stood in her father's tiny apartment in Hyde Park, surrounded by his life. The worn couch, the small TV that only got 3 clear channels, the chipped mug he always used. She should have been planning a funeral, calling relatives, sorting through papers. Instead, she sat at his kitchen table holding a yellow legal pad and a pen, trying to write down what needed to happen next. Her father's final words echoed in her head like a haunting. Trust the plan. Kendrick moved around the apartment as if he didn't know where to put himself. He wasn't the kind of man who sat in grief. He paced. He sighed. He looked out the window at the street like he was already thinking about his next meeting. We should keep it simple, he said, rubbing his hands together. He wouldn't want anything big. Aaliyah's eyes stayed on the pad. He would want what's respectful. Right, Kendrick said quickly. Respectful. That's what I mean. He glanced at his phone again. Aaliyah didn't ask. She didn't want to know. Not yet. By afternoon, the funeral home smelled like flowers and furniture polish. Earl's body looked wrong in the suit Kendrick insisted on buying. Too new, too stiff, like a costume. Aaliyah stood beside the casket and touched her father's folded hands. They were cold. Too cold. She wanted to scream at the unfairness of it, at the way a man could spend his life fixing other people's messes and still be left with nothing but a closed lid. At the cemetery the next day, rain fell in sharp sheets. Wind slid under Aaliyah's umbrella and soaked her dress. Her belly felt heavy, aching. The preacher's words blurred together. People from the school came, teachers, custodians, a handful of parents. They stood in a loose circle around the grave, faces tight, hands tucked into pockets. They looked like people who understood exactly what kind of man Earl Brooks had been. Kendrick stood beside Aaliyah, but he held the umbrella over his own head, angling it away from the rain that hit her shoulders. Every few minutes he checked his phone. Once, he exhaled loudly, impatient. When the casket lowered into the ground, Aaliyah's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the tarp, breathing hard. Her father's whole existence was being swallowed by mud, while her husband's screen kept lighting up. Aaliyah pressed 2 yellow roses onto the top of the casket, her father's favorite. The petals shivered in the rain. Aaliyah's hands sank into the damp soil as she arranged them, and when she looked down, she saw dirt under her nails. She stared at it, numb, as if the dirt was proof that this was real. Then Kendrick leaned close and whispered, I need to head out. Got a thing with some clients. Aaliyah turned slowly. A thing. Kendrick's jaw tightened. Babe, don't. We just buried my father. I know, he said, as if that was an inconvenience for him too. But this deal has been in the works for months. I can't just... Aaliyah's voice came out flat. Your wife just buried her father, and you have a thing. Kendrick looked uncomfortable for a second, like he knew how it sounded. Then the mask settled back into place. You've got people here, he said. You'll be fine. I'll see you later. He kissed her forehead quickly, the way you pat a dog. Then he walked away through the rain, pulling out his phone before he even reached his car. Aaliyah watched him go, and something inside her cracked so softly nobody else could hear it. After the service, people filed past offering condolences. Aaliyah barely registered faces. A woman with gray braids and kind eyes, Ms. Loretta Gaines from the school office, pulled Aaliyah into a hug that smelled like lavender. Your daddy talked about you every day, Loretta whispered. Every single day. Aaliyah's throat tightened. He was my whole world. Loretta pulled back, eyes wet. He told me something a few weeks ago, she said quietly. He said, Loretta, my baby girl is stronger than she knows, and she's about to need every bit of that strength. Aaliyah's breath caught. He said that? Loretta nodded, squeezing her hand. I didn't understand then. But baby, whatever is coming, you got your daddy's blood. That means you got steel in your spine. Loretta walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing alone in the rain, with those words echoing like a drumbeat. Outside the cemetery gates, the city looked like it didn't know how to mourn. Aaliyah stood on the sidewalk with her umbrella dripping, watching Kendrick's taillights disappear into the rain, and for a moment she wondered if this was what losing everything felt like. No explosion, no headline, just a quiet subtraction while the world kept its schedule. She got back into her car and sat there with her hands on the wheel, breathing shallow. Her father's grave was only a few 100 yards away, but it felt like it belonged to a different lifetime already. She turned on the heat and stared at the fog forming on the windshield, her reflection ghosted in the glass. A voicemail notification popped up from earlier. Kendrick, time-stamped while she'd been in the chapel. She hit play. Hey, Kendrick's voice said, low and brisk. I talked to someone at work about bereavement. You probably get a couple days. Just try not to let this drag out, okay? And call the insurance company if your dad had anything. We need to know what we're dealing with. The message ended. Aaliyah sat frozen, the last words repeating in her head like a chorus. What we're dealing with. Not who they lost. What they were dealing with. Aaliyah's fingers curled around the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She pictured Earl's face in the ICU, the way his eyes had held hers when he warned her. She pictured Simone's dry smile in that doorway, the word finally sliding into the air like poison. Aaliyah turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life. On the drive back to her father's apartment, the streets blurred past in gray streaks. She passed the school where Earl had worked, DuSable Elementary, its brick walls darkened by rain. The flag out front hung limp. Aaliyah imagined her father there in his navy jacket, ring of keys at his hip, opening doors for children who didn't have keys of their own. And she wondered how a man who lived so quietly could have seen so much coming. That night, Aaliyah stayed at her father's apartment. She couldn't bear the silence of her own place, the bed she shared with Kendrick. She curled up on Earl's couch in his work jacket, pulling it around her shoulders like armor. The fabric smelled like him. It was the only thing that felt real. Her phone rang around 9. Kendrick. She answered because part of her still wanted him to be the man she married, still wanted comfort from the person who was supposed to be home. Hey, Kendrick said. Music thumped in the background. Laughter, glass clinking. Just checking in. You okay? Aaliyah stared at the ceiling. Where are you? Just grabbed dinner with the team, he said quickly. You know how it is. Heavy day. Needed to decompress. Heavy day. Like he had lowered a father into the ground. When are you coming home? Aaliyah asked. Probably late, he said. We might hit a bar after. You should get some rest. You look exhausted. I look exhausted, Aaliyah repeated, voice hollow. Kendrick, I buried my dad today. I know, he said, and irritation edged his voice. That's why I'm saying rest. Look, I gotta go. We're ordering food. He hung up. Aaliyah stared at her phone until the screen went dark. That's when she saw the notification. Kendrick's Instagram had been tagged in a photo. Her hand shook as she opened the app. There he was in a booth at a restaurant she'd never been to, lighting warm on his face, smiling like a man with nothing to mourn. And beside him, pressed close, was Simone Price in a red dress that looked like it cost more than Aaliyah's rent. Simone's hand rested on Kendrick's thigh under the table, visible if you knew what to look for. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with my favorite people." Aaliyah's stomach rolled. She clicked Simone's profile. Public, full of luxury, rooftop cocktails, designer bags, selfies in hotel mirrors. And there, 3 posts down, was another photo of Kendrick and Simone together. Older, their bodies closer. His arm around her waist. Posted 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, when Earl was still walking the school hallways, but already dying inside. When Aaliyah was spending her nights at the hospital, when Kendrick was working late. Aaliyah scrolled, concert, beach, a hotel room cropped carefully at the edges. Her vision blurred. She ran to the bathroom and vomited, body rejecting the truth like poison. When she straightened up, wiping her mouth, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, her belly round beneath her father's jacket. She looked like what she was, a woman losing everything at once. Her phone buzzed, a text from Kendrick, BTW. "We need to talk when I get home. Something important." Aaliyah stared at the words. Something important. The phrase that always meant you were about to be cut open. She set the phone down and whispered to her belly, "It's okay, baby. We're going to be okay." She didn't know if it was true. She only knew her father had told her it would be. She slept in short bursts that night, waking to the sound of pipes groaning in the walls and the wind rattling the window. Each time she drifted off, she dreamed of Earl's hand slipping away. By morning, her eyes felt gritty, her body heavy. Kendrick still hadn't come home. At 6:02 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Crashed at Dave's. Coming by at 9. We need to talk. Important." Aaliyah sat up slowly on the couch. Her hand went to her belly. The baby kicked once, hard, like a protest. "Good," Aaliyah whispered. "Stay strong." She showered in her father's tiny bathroom, the hot water barely enough to cut the chill in her bones. She put on a simple black dress, the same one from the funeral. Everything else felt too bright, too alive. She made coffee she didn't drink. She sat at the kitchen table and waited. Kendrick arrived at 9:17, late on purpose. He walked in smelling like expensive cologne, hair-styled, suit crisp. He looked like he'd slept 8 hours, like he hadn't spent the past day watching his wife fall apart. He held a manila folder. Aaliyah's heart began to pound. "Hey," he said, not meeting her eyes. "How you feeling?" "How do you think I'm feeling?" she asked quietly. Kendrick sat across from her like he was about to negotiate a contract. He slid the folder onto the table. "There's no easy way to say this," he began. Aaliyah didn't move. The room seemed to narrow around that folder, the corners sharpening. "I want a divorce," Kendrick said. The words landed heavy, but Aaliyah had been bracing for them. Still, her breath caught, her hands tightened around the edge of the table. "What?" she whispered. "I'm not happy, Aaliyah," he said, voice rehearsed. "I haven't been for a long time." Aaliyah let out a low, disbelieving laugh. "My dad died yesterday." "I know," Kendrick said quickly, eyes flicking away. "And I'm sorry, but the timing isn't ideal. The timing isn't ideal." Aaliyah stared at him, and something inside her went numb. "I'm 6 months pregnant." "I know," Kendrick said, "and I'll support the baby financially. I'm not a monster." He said it like he wanted credit for basic decency. Aaliyah reached for her phone, opened Instagram, and slid it across the table without a word. Kendrick's eyes lowered. His face tightened. "How long?" Aaliyah asked, voice dangerously calm. "How long have you been sleeping with Simone while I was holding my father's hand?" "It's not like that," Kendrick said. "Then what is it like?" Her voice rose slightly, not a scream, but sharper. Tell me what it's like to cheat on your pregnant wife while her father is dying. Kendrick's jaw clenched. Don't make this ugly. You already did, Aaliyah said. Kendrick exhaled, switching to his sales voice. Simone and we connect. She understands the life I want. And what am I? Aaliyah asked. A burden? Kendrick hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any confession. You're a good person, he said finally, pity softening his tone. You really are, but you were never going to be enough for where I'm headed. Aaliyah felt her baby kick again, like the truth hit even harder inside her. Kendrick stood. My lawyer will be in touch. I already have everything drafted. Sign it and we can keep this clean. Clean. Aaliyah's lips parted, but no words came. The room spun. Kendrick buttoned his jacket. I'll come by this weekend to get my stuff. He walked toward the door. Kendrick, Aaliyah whispered, hating the weakness in her voice, hating that part of her that still wanted him to turn around. He paused, looked back. For a second, she thought she saw guilt. But it wasn't guilt. It was pity. You'll be okay, he said. You're strong. You'll figure it out. Then he left. Aaliyah sat in silence, staring at the folder like it might explode. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hi, Aaliyah. This is Simone. I know this must be hard, but Kendrick and I are in love. We'd appreciate your discretion and cooperation during this transition. We'd like to move forward as quickly as possible. Thank you for understanding. Aaliyah read it twice, then a third time. The audacity wasn't loud. It was clinical, like Simone was writing to cancel a subscription. Something cold slid into place inside Aaliyah's chest, clear as ice. She stood, slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She walked into her father's bedroom closet, pulled down the old Nike shoebox from the top shelf, and held it in her hands. The cardboard was worn at the corners. Dust rose in a faint cloud as she opened the lid. Inside were old receipts, a faded photo of Earl holding baby Aaliyah, and at the bottom, a thin piece of cardboard. Aaliyah lifted it. False bottom. Her fingers trembled as she pried it up. A small key lay inside, taped to a folded card. On the card, in her father's handwriting, Box 1247, alone. Aaliyah pressed the key into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Then she picked up her purse, grabbed her father's jacket, and walked out into the gray Chicago morning. It was time to find out what Earl Brooks meant, because right now, Aaliyah felt abandoned. But her father had promised her something else, and she was done letting men decide what she deserved. Aaliyah drove toward the loop with her father's key clenched so tight the metal left little crescent marks in her palm. Chicago looked washed and sharp after the rain, the streets shining like they'd been scrubbed clean for someone else's life. People hurried with their heads down, collars up, eyes forward. The city didn't slow for grief. It never had. Lakeshore Federal sat between glass towers like an older relative who refused to move. Dark stone, heavy doors, quiet authority, the kind of building that held secrets for a living. Aaliyah parked, steadied her breathing, and stepped inside. Cool air hit her face. Marble floors gleamed. Even the sound of footsteps felt muffled, as if the building demanded restraint. A guard nodded. A receptionist looked up. Hi, Aaliyah said, forcing her voice to stay level. I need to access a safety deposit box, Box 1247. The receptionist's fingers stopped mid-type. She looked at Aaliyah again, slower this time, not suspicion, recognition. One moment, ma'am, she said, then disappeared through a staff door. Aaliyah stood still, one hand over her belly. The baby shifted, a steadying weight. It reminded her, in the most practical way, that she could not collapse here. Not yet. A tall man in a gray suit returned with the receptionist. He carried himself like a person who didn't ask twice. Ms. Brooks? He said. Yes. I'm Wesley Hartman, branch manager. Please follow me. He led her down a corridor and through a secured door into the vault area, where the air turned colder and smelled faintly of metal. Rows of boxes lined the walls like a library no one bragged about. He brought her into a small private room with a table. I'll need your key, he said gently. Aaliyah set it down. Wesley pulled out the bank key, turned them together, and retrieved a long metal case. He placed it on the table, then stepped back. "I'll give you privacy," he said. "If you need me, there's a call button." He closed the door behind him. For a long moment, Aaliyah just stared at the case. It looked harmless. But her father had spoken about this box like it held the last pieces of him. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside was a single thick envelope, cream-colored and sealed. On the front, in her father's careful handwriting, were two words that broke something open in her chest. "Baby girl." Aaliyah pressed her fingertips to the ink as if she could touch his voice through it. Then she slid a nail under the seal and opened it. A letter came first, folded twice, his neat writing filling both sides. Beneath it were documents, statements, certificates, pages stamped and notarized, the kind of paper that decided futures. Her mind couldn't take the pile yet. It grabbed for the letter like air. "My Leah, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry you had to watch me leave. I wanted to be there for every moment of your life, and I still will be, just in a different way. You are not alone. You are not poor. You are not powerless. I made sure of that, and I did it quietly, the way we do things when we mean them." Aaliyah swallowed hard, eyes burning. She kept reading because stopping would mean falling. "My name is Earl Hartwell III. I walked away from my family's fortune to raise you with love instead of pressure. I never regretted it, but I never stopped protecting what was always meant to be yours." Her breath caught, and then her eyes hit the number printed on a separate page. Total estate valuation, $5,200,000, $5.2 billion. It didn't fit inside her head. Her father, who wore the same boots every winter and acted like a new coat was an unnecessary luxury, had been worth $5.2 billion. Aaliyah blinked hard. The number stayed. She looked down at the next lines and felt the room tilt. Holdings, shares, properties, accounts, a foundation endowment already established, already funded, waiting like a door with the key left in it. And then she found the sentence that turned her father's warning into a lock. "All assets have been transferred into an irrevocable trust established in your name. No spouse, current or future, has any claim. No divorce settlement can reach it. No lawsuit can touch it. It is bulletproof. Bulletproof." Aaliyah let out a sound that was almost laughter and almost a sob. She pressed the letter to her chest and felt the paper crinkle under her fingers. A soft knock came at the door. Aaliyah jumped. "Ms. Brooks?" Wesley's voice asked through the door. "Are you all right?" Aaliyah drew in a shaky breath. "Yes, I just need a minute." "Take your time," he said, and stepped away. Aaliyah lowered the letter and forced herself back into it. The next paragraphs were the ones that cut. "I know what Kendrick is going to do, Leah. I saw it in his eyes months ago. The way he looked at your belly like it was a bill. The way he looked at my hospital bracelets like they were your problem. I changed my will because I could not leave you exposed. Your husband came to see me 3 weeks before I died. He stayed 15 minutes. He complained about money, about the timing of the baby. He asked about life insurance, and he asked what you would inherit. He did not ask how I felt. He asked what you would be worth." Aaliyah's blood flashed hot, then cold. Kendrick had told her he couldn't get away from work that day. He had let her drive to the hospital alone while he sat at her father's bedside and did math. After he left, I called attorney Mariah Vaughn. She has managed my affairs for years. I told her Kendrick would try to leave you when things got hard, and I told her to make sure he never could. Trust the plan. Now the phrase had a different sound, not comfort, strategy. At the bottom of the envelope, taped to a business card, was a phone number. Mariah Vaughn, attorney at law. Aaliyah stared at the card until her heartbeat settled into something usable. Then she called. The line rang once. "Vaughn Legal," a calm female voice answered. Aaliyah cleared her throat. "My name is Aaliyah Brooks. Earl Brooks was my father. He told me to call." A pause, small but heavy. "Ms. Brooks," the voice said gently, "we have been expecting you. This is Mariah." Aaliyah closed her eyes. "He's gone." I know, Mariah said. I'm sorry. He was an extraordinary man. I opened the box, Aaliyah whispered. I saw the number. 5.2, Mariah replied, like she was naming a fact, not a storm. Yes, Aaliyah swallowed. My husband asked me for a divorce this morning. I know, Mariah said softly. Your father predicted it. Aaliyah's grip tightened on the phone. What do I do? First, breathe, Mariah said. Second, come to my office today. I'll explain what your father built. When you leave the bank, ask Mr. Hartman for the sealed packet labeled transition. Bring it unopened. Unopened, Aaliyah repeated. Yes, Mariah said. Your father liked clean lines. He left you clean lines. When the call ended, Aaliyah sat still for a moment. Then she pressed the button. Wesley returned immediately. I need a sealed packet labeled transition, Aaliyah said. Wesley didn't blink. Of course. He retrieved a sealed folder and slid it across the table. His voice dropped lower. Your father instructed us, he said. Aaliyah held the packet, feeling the weight of it like a hand on her shoulder. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the gray no longer looked like an ending. It looked like a blank page. She drove to Mariah Vaughn's office in silence, the radio off, the city passing like a muted film. The receptionist greeted her by name without asking. A door opened and Mariah stepped out. Late 40s, sharp bob, simple black suit, eyes that didn't flinch. Aaliyah, Mariah said, and her voice carried both authority and restraint. Aaliyah's throat tightened. He called you. Many times, Mariah said. Come with me. She led Aaliyah into a conference room with a long table and a view of the river. The city moved outside the window, indifferent. Inside, everything felt controlled, as if chaos had been denied entry. Mariah placed a folder on the table and spoke without wasting a breath. I want you to understand 3 things, she said. Your father loved you. He anticipated betrayal, and he prepared with law, not emotion. Aaliyah's hands clenched in her lap. He knew Kendrick would leave. He knew Kendrick would try, Mariah corrected, and he made sure Kendrick could not take what was never his. Mariah slid the trust documents forward. This is irrevocable. The trust owns the assets. You control the trust. Kendrick controls nothing. Aaliyah's voice came out thin. Even if we were still married? Especially then, Mariah said. Marriage is love. Divorce is paperwork. Your father respected both, but he trusted one more than the other. Aaliyah stared at her name, printed beside trustee and beneficiary. It felt like she was reading a script and realizing she had been cast as the lead without being told. Mariah explained the structure in clean, steady lines, accounts for immediate needs, investments protected, a foundation already established for women in crisis, funded and waiting. He wanted you safe, Mariah said, and he wanted you free. Aaliyah swallowed. What happens now? Mariah folded her hands. Now you do what your father asked. You let Kendrick go. Aaliyah flinched. Just sign, just let him walk away? Mariah's gaze stayed steady. Not because you are weak, because you are strategic. A divorce is a door. You walk through it quietly and lock it behind you. Aaliyah thought of Kendrick's pity, the way he'd spoken to her like she was a project he was finishing. You'll be okay. You'll figure it out. She felt something settle into place, cold and clear. Mariah tapped the sealed packet. Your father wrote the next steps with me. It covers the next 30 days. We will open it when you are ready. Aaliyah rested her hand on the packet, feeling the edge through the paper. Mariah watched her. He also left one instruction that isn't legal. Aaliyah looked up. What? Mariah's mouth tightened briefly, like she refused to let emotion win. Do not ruin yourself trying to ruin them. Aaliyah's throat burned. He said that. Mariah nodded. He believed the best revenge is a life so well lived it makes regret feel like poison. Aaliyah stared out at the river, dark under the winter sky. She didn't want to scream. She didn't want to fight in public, clawing for dignity. I don't want to be cruel, Aaliyah said quietly. I just want to be done. Mariah's voice softened by a fraction. Then be done. You do not owe explanations to people who chose not to see you. Aaliyah inhaled, slow. The baby shifted again, steady, as if agreeing. All right, Aaliyah said. Mariah nodded once, satisfied. Good. Aaliyah left the office at dusk, the city lights starting to blink on like cautious stars. She sat in her car and let one long breath out. Kendrick had asked for a divorce thinking she was a woman with nothing but grief. He had no idea her father had left her a shield, and Simone, with that sharp little word, had no idea she'd whispered finally at the wrong door. Aaliyah started the engine. She wasn't going home to beg. She was going home to sign the papers, quietly, cleanly, and then, when the time was right, she would step into a room full of people and let the truth speak for itself. She drove first to her own apartment. Inside, the place felt staged, too quiet, like it already knew a marriage was walking out. Kendrick's jacket was gone from the hook. His shoes were gone from the mat. He hadn't just asked for a divorce. He'd already been practicing absence. Aaliyah set Mariah's sealed packet on the counter and stared at the folder Kendrick left on the table. The papers were stacked and flagged with sticky notes, bright little arrows telling her where to sign. Her phone buzzed. Did you sign yet? No, hello. No, are you okay? Just a deadline. Aaliyah didn't answer. She sat down, picked up the pen, and signed, page after page. Her name over and over, each stroke quieter than the last, like she was writing herself out of a lie. When she finished, she slid the documents into the return envelope to Kendrick's attorney and taped it shut. Then she opened Mariah's packet. Inside were timelines and a single page in her father's handwriting. Leah, do not argue. Do not plead. Let him go fast. Men who leave in a hurry always trip over what they didn't see. Aaliyah folded the page and tucked it into her wallet. She drove to the post office and dropped the envelope into the slot. It fell with a soft thud that sounded final. That night, she called Mariah. I signed, Aaliyah said. Good, Mariah replied. Now we build. Quietly, then publicly. Aaliyah's eyes drifted to her phone where Simone Price's name sat in her recent searches. She wants status, Aaliyah said. She wants to be seen next to power. Then we let her come close to it, Mariah said, calm. Close enough to think she's winning. Aaliyah opened Simone's LinkedIn profile and read the words Simone used like perfume. Visionary, strategic, community-minded. I want a small dinner, Aaliyah said. High level. The kind that makes people lean in. Mariah paused, and Aaliyah could almost hear her father's plan clicking into place. Your father already reserved a date for a foundation announcement, Mariah said. We can host it at the museum. Her grief was still there, but it had edges now. Send the invitations, she said. And Aaliyah, Mariah added softer. When they arrive, you stay quiet. Let curiosity do the work. After she hung up, her phone buzzed again. Thank you for being reasonable. Aaliyah deleted the message without replying. She laid a hand over her belly and whispered, Let them celebrate. Because soon they were going to learn what it feels like to clap for your own mistake. 3 weeks can be a long time when you're living inside a secret. Aaliyah Brooks moved through those days like a woman walking on ice, careful, quiet, eyes forward. Kendrick's last name was still attached to hers in a few places, but spiritually he was already a stranger. She showed up to work. She kept her prenatal appointments. She answered condolences with polite nods, and when she was alone, she read her father's letter until the ink felt like a pulse. Mariah Vaughn handled the ugly parts without drama. The divorce finalized quickly, cleanly, almost bloodless. Kendrick took his clothes, his shoes, his pride. He left the apartment as if he were leaving a hotel room he'd outgrown. Simone posted anyway. Ring selfies, courthouse shots, captions about new beginnings. The congratulations and flame emojis made Aaliyah's stomach turn, so she didn't look again. She let it happen the way you let a storm pass when you've built your house out of stone. On the morning of the dinner, Chicago's wind came off the lake like a blade. The museum glowed behind its glass walls, warm light spilling onto marble and quiet music. The invitations had been simple. A private reception for the launch of the Brooks Hartwell Foundation. No numbers, just a name that sounded old, steady, untouchable. People came because mystery is a magnet, board members, civic leaders, donors with trained smiles. And then, right on time, Simone Price. Simone walked in wearing red, sharp against the room's soft gold. Kendrick followed half a step behind, his hand at her waist like a claim, but his eyes kept scanning, measuring, searching for who mattered. He didn't see Aaliyah at first. He saw the money, the quiet authority, the kind of room that could change a career with one introduction. Aaliyah watched them from across the gallery, calm enough to taste it. Her daughter shifted inside her, a steady reminder that this wasn't about winning a man. It was about ending an era. Mariah stepped to the front. Her voice was low but carried. "Thank you for joining us," she said. "Tonight we introduce a foundation created to support women in crisis, single mothers, grieving families, survivors rebuilding their lives. Our founder built it from the values of a man who never had to be loud to be powerful." Aaliyah took one step forward, just one, like a door opening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mariah said, "please welcome Ms. Aaliyah Brooks Hartwell." The name landed like a stone dropped in deep water. Kendrick's head snapped toward the sound before his mind caught up. His eyes found her, and his face went blank, pure disbelief. Simone turned next, smile already lifted, ready to charm whoever held the checkbook. Her smile froze when she saw Aaliyah. Aaliyah walked to the small stage, one hand resting lightly on her belly. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She simply stood where the light could not ignore her. "My father," she began, voice steady, "spent 35 years fixing broken things in an elementary school. He stayed late to mop up messes nobody wanted to claim. He worked Christmas shifts so I could have presents under a tree." Murmurs moved through the room. "I believed he was a simple man," Aaliyah continued. "But what he was, truly, was intentional. He chose a quiet life because he believed character matters more than cash." Her eyes traveled, slow, until they met Kendrick's. "And 3 months ago," she said, "I was 6 months pregnant, standing at my father's grave, when my husband decided it was a good time to leave." Kendrick's color drained. Simone lifted a hand toward her mouth, fighting her own expression. Aaliyah didn't name them. She didn't have to. In rooms like this, implication is sharper than accusation. "My father anticipated that moment," she said, "because he watched the way some people look at love like a ladder." She paused, just long enough for every ear to lean in. "When he died," Aaliyah said, "he left me not only his values, but his estate, approximately $5.2 billion. The room inhaled as one body. Kendrick's fingers tightened around the back of a chair. His knees locked. Simone's eyes widened, then narrowed, as if she could bargain with the number. Aaliyah continued, calm as glass. "He placed every asset in an irrevocable trust before he passed. A trust designed to protect me and my child from anyone who thought marriage was a claim." Her gaze returned to Kendrick like a quiet verdict. "I'm not telling you this to impress you," she said to the room. "I'm telling you because I know what it feels like to think you're alone, to think you are powerless. This foundation is a door for women who are standing in the dark, holding their breath, hoping someone sees them." Applause rose, not wild, but deep, the kind that meant respect. People stood, not because they were told to, because they recognized composure under pressure. Kendrick didn't move. Simone didn't clap. They backed away like the air had turned toxic, and then they left. She didn't watch them all the way out. She listened instead, to the hush that followed, to the soft clink of glasses, to the steady beat of her own heart. In that hush, she heard her father again. "You are never alone, never poor, never powerless." And for the first time since the ICU, the words didn't sound like comfort, they sounded like inheritance. Cold peace settled into her bones. Down in the garage, where the museum's warmth couldn't reach, Simone's control finally slipped. "Oh my God, Kendrick," she hissed, then broke. "You left a billionaire. You divorced a billionaire for me. What have we done?" Kendrick's voice came back thin. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care, Simone snapped. You saw her dad's jacket and decided she was nothing, and now everyone up there knows what I am. She yanked the ring off her finger and threw it. It clinked once, a tiny sound for a huge mistake. I can't be married to a man who is this stupid, she said, voice shaking. This is over. Kendrick grabbed for her arm. Simone, wait. She pulled free and walked away without looking back. Upstairs, Aaliyah accepted hands and business cards and promises of partnership. She smiled when appropriate, thanked people when needed, and kept her breathing slow. Mariah stood at her side like a shadow made of steel. When the room finally thinned, Mariah leaned in. Your father would be proud. Aaliyah swallowed. I can feel him. 2 months later, on a morning so bright it looked like mercy, Aaliyah gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Nia Earl Hartwell because she wanted her daughter to carry both the softness and the strength. Kendrick was granted supervised visits. He came, awkward and quiet, standing by the crib like a man staring at the cost of his own choices. Aaliyah didn't hate him. Hate would have been a tie. She was done being tied. The foundation opened its doors within the year, rent paid, legal aid provided, groceries delivered to women whose pride had been starving them. Aaliyah showed up without cameras, with checks and quiet conversations, because she remembered what it felt like to sit in a hospital chair for 16 hours and still be told you were asking too much. 5 years later, Aaliyah stood outside DuSable Elementary with Nia's small hand in hers. Kids ran past, laughing. The building looked the same, and yet everything was different. Kendrick appeared at drop-off, hands in his pockets, eyes cautious. She's amazing, he said quietly. Yes, Aaliyah replied, watching her daughter skip inside. She is. Kendrick hesitated, then said, I think about Earl a lot. Aaliyah didn't turn. Good, she said. You should. Because Earl Brooks had given his daughter something bigger than money. He gave her proof that love can be practical, that protection can be planned, that quiet people can build storms in paper and ink that outlast betrayal. And if you've ever felt abandoned, underestimated, or left behind at your worst moment, remember this. Sometimes the person who walks away is making room for the life you were always meant to live. If this story hit you somewhere deep, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Tap like to support the channel and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Aaliyah's place? Stay silent, confront them, or walk away and rise? And when the end screen pops up, click one of the videos on your screen and keep the stories going.